The evening was already busy when she arrived. People moved fast through the wide open hall, some pulling luggage, some holding phones, some talking loudly without care. Music often played here, but most people treated it like background noise. They heard it without listening. That was normal. No one expected anything special on a day like this. She walked in slowly, carrying a small bag on her shoulder. Her steps were quiet, almost careful, as if she didn't want to disturb the space. A simple mask covered the upper part of her face. It wasn't dramatic or stylish. It looked plain, almost forgotten. Some people glanced at her for a second, then looked away. A masked woman didn't seem important in a place where everyone was rushing somewhere else. Near the center of the hall stood an old piano. Its surface had marks and scratches from years of use. The keys were slightly yellow, and a few made soft clicking sounds when pressed. Many had played it before. Some were good, most were not. Still, the piano remained, waiting for anyone brave enough to sit down. She stopped in front of it and stood there for a moment. Her hands rested at her sides. She took a slow breath. To anyone watching, she looked unsure, maybe even nervous. A man passing by whispered to his friend, saying she would probably play something short and leave. Another person smiled, already expecting disappointment, but she wasn't thinking about them. Her thoughts were somewhere else. Years back, long nights, cold rooms, a broken chair placed near a second-hand keyboard that sometimes lost sound in the middle of a note. She remembered practicing with gloves on because the room had no heat. She remembered stopping when neighbors banged on the wall, angry about the noise. She remembered learning to play softly, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She placed her bag on the floor and sat down on the piano bench. The bench creaked slightly. She adjusted her position, not too close, not too far. Her posture was calm, steady, trained. Anyone who truly understood music might have noticed that, but most people didn't. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened. Someone coughed. Someone else laughed near the back. The noise of footsteps continued around her. It felt like the moment before rain, when the air is heavy but no one looks up yet. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She didn't rush. This was not a performance to show off. It was something else, something personal. Before she played, her mind drifted again. She thought about the first time she ever touched a piano. It was not in a big hall like this. It was in a small community room with peeling paint and a locked window that barely opened. She was younger then, too shy to speak much. Someone had told her she should try the piano because she seemed quiet. They probably didn't mean anything special by it. But that moment changed her life. She had pressed one key, just one. The sound surprised her. It stayed in her chest long after the note faded. From that day on, she searched for that feeling again and again. But life was not kind. There were years when she couldn't practice at all. Years when survival mattered more than music. She worked small jobs, cleaning, serving, carrying things for others. The piano became something she visited only in her dreams. Still, she listened to music everywhere. On old radios, on broken phones, in her head when everything else was silent. Now, here she was. Her fingers finally touched the keys. The first note was soft, almost too soft. A few people nearby didn't even notice it. It blended into the sound of the hall. Someone walking by stepped right in front of the piano for a moment, blocking the view. She played another note, then another. The melody was simple, slow, gentle. A woman nearby paused her conversation. She didn't know why, but something about the sound felt different. A man tying his shoe nearby looked up briefly, then stayed still. The music did not demand attention. It invited it. Her hands moved smoothly, like they remembered something her mind no longer needed to think about. Each note flowed into the next, not rushed, not heavy. It was the kind of playing that didn't try to impress. It tried to speak. People began to notice. A small group gathered a few steps away. Someone pulled out a phone but didn't start recording yet. Another person frowned slightly, confused by the feeling rising inside. She kept her eyes on the keys. The mask hid her expression, but her body told its own story. She leaned slightly into certain notes, pulling back on others. It was clear she wasn't just playing sounds. She was telling something. Still, not everyone was kind. A young man whispered loudly, asking why she wore a mask if she had nothing to hide. His friend laughed. Another person shrugged and said it was probably just a trick to get attention. She heard none of it. Or maybe she heard it all and chose to keep playing anyway. The melody slowly grew deeper. The notes became more connected, more emotional. There was sadness in them, but also patience. like someone who had waited a long time and learned how to survive the waiting. An older man sitting on a bench nearby closed his eyes. The music reminded him of something he couldn't name, a place, a time, someone he once knew. The hall felt different now. The noise didn't disappear, but it softened around the piano. People slowed down as they passed. Some stopped walking altogether. She played with control, not force. Every movement was measured. It was clear she had spent many hours alone with music, learning not just how to play, but how to listen. A child tugged at their parent's sleeve and pointed at the piano. The parent nodded and stood still for a moment, watching. She reached the end of the first section of the piece and let the final note hang in the air, just a little longer than expected. That pause was important. It made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. For a second, there was silence. Then she continued. This time, the sound carried more weight. The left hand added depth, grounding the melody. It felt like the earth beneath bare feet, steady, honest. Somewhere inside her, emotion pressed against her chest. Not pain exactly, not joy either. Something mixed, something real. She remembered being told once that music was not a real future, that it was a waste of time, that people like her should focus on practical things. She remembered nodding quietly, pretending to agree, while holding music tightly inside like a secret. Now, that secret was filling the room. A woman near the front wiped her eyes without understanding why. A man who had laughed earlier stopped smiling. The mask no longer mattered. What mattered was the sound she played on. Unaware of how many hearts were beginning to open around her, unaware of how this simple choice to sit down and play was slowly changing the space. She was still just a masked musician at a public piano, but something had already begun, and no one there would forget this moment, even if they didn't yet understand why. The music continued, and the space around the piano slowly changed. What had once been a place of rushing footsteps and loud voices now felt calmer, as if the sound itself was asking people to slow down. More listeners gathered without realizing they were doing it. They didn't come because they were told to. They came because something inside them pulled them closer. She stayed focused on the keys. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the music. Each note felt familiar, like an old path she had walked many times alone. She did not look up. She did not search for faces. She played the way she always had, honestly. Not everyone was impressed. A few people stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching with doubt. One man shook his head and said it wasn't anything special. Another whispered that anyone could play slowly and make it sound emotional. Their words floated in the air, but didn't land where they wanted. She had heard worse before. There were times in her life when people laughed directly at her face. Times when she was told she didn't belong in music rooms, didn't look like a performer, didn't sound like someone worth listening to. Those memories did not hurt as much now. They had hardened into something quiet and strong. Her hands moved with more confidence as the piece grew. The melody climbed higher, then dropped gently, like a wave reaching shore and pulling back. It carried struggle in it, but also control. Pain, but also understanding. A woman near the front leaned toward her friend and whispered that the music felt real. Her friend nodded without taking their eyes off the piano. Someone finally started recording. The small red light on a phone turned on, though the person holding it forgot about the screen after a few seconds. They were listening now, not filming. The pianist shifted slightly on the bench. The movement was natural, practiced. Anyone who knew music could see that she wasn't guessing. She knew exactly where she was going. The sound grew fuller, not louder, but deeper. Her left hand carried weight, while her right hand spoke clearly, like a voice that had waited too long to be heard. She remembered another piano, a different one. Broken pedals, keys that stuck. She remembered fixing it with tape and patience. She remembered playing in empty rooms, pretending they were full. This room was no longer empty. A security worker nearby slowed his steps and stopped. He had planned to tell her she couldn't stay long, that performances needed permission. But something held him back. He folded his arms and listened instead. The piece took a turn. The melody became faster, more complex. The change surprised some listeners. A few people straightened their backs. Others took a sharp breath. This was no longer background music. The notes moved like fire under control. Strong, quick, but careful. Her fingers danced across the keys without missing a beat. There was no fear in her movement, only trust. Someone near the back whispered, asking where she learned to play like that. No one answered. She leaned slightly forward now, fully inside the sound. The mask still covered part of her face, but the emotion was clear in her posture, in her shoulders, in the way her hands pressed down with intention. A man who had laughed earlier shifted his weight and stopped smiling. His eyes stayed fixed on her hands. The hall felt smaller now, closer. Like everyone was sharing the same breath. She played a run of notes so clean and smooth that a soft sound moved through the crowd. Not applause. Something quieter. Respect. Her mind stayed calm. That surprised even her. She had expected nerves, fear, shaking hands. But none of that came. It felt like she had been waiting for this moment longer than she realized. A memory surfaced. Standing outside a closed door, listening to music lessons she could not afford. She remembered sitting on stairs, counting beats in her head, learning by listening. She remembered telling herself that one day, she would play like that too. Not for fame, just for truth. Her hands crossed briefly, then separated again. The movement was quick, confident. A few people gasped quietly. The security worker took a step closer, then stopped again. The music softened suddenly. The shift felt like a question asked in a quiet voice. The room leaned into it. She allowed space between the notes now, letting them breathe, letting the silence speak to. A child near the front sat down on the floor, eyes wide, completely still. She felt emotion rise again, stronger this time. It pressed against her chest, but she didn't let it break her focus. She had learned long ago how to hold feelings without losing control. The piece was not finished yet. This part mattered. She played a sequence that carried sadness openly now. No hiding, no protection. The notes felt heavy, but honest. Like a confession without words. A woman covered her mouth. Someone else wiped their face. The pianist remembered nights when she thought of giving up. When the world felt too loud and her voice too small. When music felt like a dream she was not allowed to keep. But she kept it anyway. She played through that memory, letting it move through her fingers and out into the room. The sound wrapped around the listeners. It didn't ask them to feel anything specific. It simply invited them to remember their own quiet struggles. The man who had earlier complained about the mask now stood silent, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. The music began to rise again. Strength returned to the melody. Not anger, not pride, strength. Her fingers struck the keys with clarity and purpose. Each note landed exactly where it should. The sound filled the space fully now, leaving no corner untouched. People who had been passing through stopped completely. Bags rested on the floor. Phones were forgotten. The pianist felt steady, grounded. She reached another pause, holding the last note just long enough to make hearts beat a little faster. No one spoke. She continued. This time, the music carried hope. Not loud hope, quiet hope. The kind that survives difficult days. She didn't know how many people were listening now. She didn't need to know. She only knew that the piano was answering her, and the room was listening. She was no longer invisible. But the biggest moment was still ahead. The power she carried was only beginning to show. The music did not stop. It changed. What filled the hall now felt stronger, clearer. Like the moment when clouds slowly move away and light finds a way through. The sound grew bold, but it was still controlled. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. It felt earned. She lifted her head slightly for the first time. Not enough for anyone to see her eyes clearly, but enough to feel the room around her. She could sense the silence. It was deep and full, not empty. People were no longer waiting for the music to end. They were inside it. Her fingers moved with confidence she did not always have. She remembered when her hands used to shake before playing in front of anyone. How fear once made her miss notes. How doubt used to sit beside her on every bench. That fear was gone now. Not because life became easier, but because she had learned how to carry it. The melody climbed higher, brighter. It carried a feeling of standing up after a long fall, of brushing off dust and choosing to keep going. A few listeners leaned forward without realizing it. One man pressed his lips together, holding something back. She thought about the mask. She wore it for more than one reason. It was not only to hide her face. It was to protect the quiet life she had built. The simple jobs. The days where no one expected anything from her. Music had always been hers alone. Bringing it into the open felt like opening a door she had kept closed for years. But she was here now. The piano answered her touch warmly, as if it recognized her effort. Each note rang clear. Even the old keys responded, almost grateful to be played with care. A woman near the front whispered that this was no ordinary performance. Her voice shook slightly when she spoke. The security worker stepped closer again, this time with purpose. But instead of stopping her, he stood near the side, quietly keeping others from interrupting. He had decided, without saying a word, that this moment deserved protection. The music shifted again. This part was personal. The sound softened, then broke into a pattern that felt like memory. Not one memory, but many. Small moments stitched together. Early mornings, long walks, silent rides home. Times when she felt unseen. Her chest tightened. She allowed the feeling to stay, but not control her. She had practiced this too. She remembered the day she lost her last place to practice. The building closed without warning. The piano inside was sold. She stood outside afterward, unsure where to go next. That night, she played on a table, tapping rhythms with her fingers, refusing to let the sound disappear. Those rhythms lived in her now. They came out through the keys, steady and sure. A listener near the back quietly said that the music felt honest. No one answered, but several nodded. She played a short pause again, letting the sound fade just enough to create tension. Someone inhaled sharply. The silence felt alive. Then she continued. The melody returned with strength. Not loud strength, but deep strength. The kind that does not ask for approval. Her hands moved faster now, crossing, lifting, landing with confidence. The crowd watched closely. Some could not believe what they were seeing. Others stopped trying to explain it and simply listened. A man who had been standing with his arms crossed slowly let them fall to his sides. The child on the floor leaned forward, eyes wide, following every movement. She felt warmth rise through her arms and shoulders. It was the feeling she chased for years. Not praise, not attention, connection. The piano sang. People forgot where they were. For a few minutes, the busy hall felt like a single quiet room where everyone shared the same story. Even if they didn't know the details, she reached a section of the piece that demanded everything. Focus, control, emotion. She had practiced this part countless times in her mind, sometimes without an instrument at all. Her fingers did not fail her. The sound burst forward, full and clear. A wave of feeling moved through the crowd. Someone gasped openly this time. Someone else whispered, unable to help it. She leaned in, fully present. This was no longer about hiding. The mask still covered part of her face, but the truth was no longer hidden. It poured out through the keys, strong and fearless. She remembered being told once that her quiet nature would hold her back, that strong voices belonged to others. She remembered accepting that lie for too long. Now, the piano spoke for her. The music carried fire, but not anger, passion, but not chaos. It was shaped by patience and years of waiting. The security worker glanced around and noticed how many people had gathered. He had never seen this place so still. She felt a shift inside herself. Something opened. The final part of this section approached. She slowed slightly, guiding the sound carefully. The melody softened again, like a hand resting gently on a shoulder. Emotion rose sharply now. Her throat tightened. She swallowed and kept playing. She thought of the people who never believed in her. Not with bitterness, with understanding. They never saw the side of her because she never showed it. That was changing. Her hands played a simple pattern, repeating it with small changes. The crowd breathed with it. A woman near the edge whispered that this felt like a goodbye and a beginning at the same time. She held the final note of this section longer than before, letting it ring, letting it settle. The sound faded slowly. No one moved. Her fingers hovered above the keys again. She did not rush to continue. She let the moment stand on its own, inside. Her heart beat fast but steady. She knew now. There was no turning back. Whatever came next would change everything. She lowered her hands and began the next movement, preparing for the moment when the truth would no longer stay silent. The power no one expected was about to be revealed. The music moved into a space no one expected. The sound grew fuller, richer, as if something hidden had finally stepped into the light. The notes carried strength that felt almost physical, like a heartbeat shared by everyone in the room. People stood still, afraid that even a small movement might break the moment. She felt it too. This was the part she had always kept to herself. Her fingers pressed the keys with confidence, but also with release. Years of holding back, of staying small, poured into the piano. The melody rose, bold and clear, without asking permission. A man near the front whispered that this did not sound like someone playing for fun. It sounded like someone who had lived. She remembered why she stopped performing in public long ago. One short chance, one small stage, a room full of people who didn't listen. Harsh words spoken casually. Laughter that stayed with her longer than applause ever could. She chose silence after that. The mask came later. It started as protection, a way to exist without questions, a way to play without being judged by a face, a past, or a story no one bothered to hear. Now, the music was answering all the questions. Her hands moved faster, stronger. The piano responded fully now, ringing through the hall. The sound filled every corner, impossible to ignore. People felt it in their chests. A woman clutched her bag tightly, eyes shining. A man wiped his face quickly and looked away, embarrassed by his own reaction. She reached a point in the piece where everything came together. Control, emotion, memory, hope. It demanded courage. She did not hesitate. The music burst forward, powerful and fearless. Not loud noise, but clear intention. Every note landed with meaning. The crowd reacted without thinking. Some stepped closer. Some pressed hands to mouths. No one spoke. She leaned into the piano, fully present. The mask felt lighter now, almost unnecessary. Then something changed. A soft sound came from the bench as she shifted her weight. Her hand lifted from the keys for a brief moment. The music paused. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with expectation. She took a slow breath. Her fingers returned to the keys. But before she played again, she reached up with one hand. The movement was small, but everyone saw it. She touched the edge of the mask. A quiet wave moved through the crowd. Some thought she was adjusting it. Others felt something deeper was coming. She paused again, her hand resting there. Then, slowly, she removed the mask. The action was simple, calm, honest. There was no dramatic gesture, no rush. Her face was revealed. People leaned forward instinctively, searching for answers in her expression. What they found surprised them. She did not look proud. She did not look angry. She looked human. Her eyes carried years of quiet effort. Her expression held calm strength. Someone whispered her name softly, realizing they had seen her before. Somewhere ordinary, somewhere unnoticed. She placed the mask gently beside her on the bench. Then she played. The sound that followed felt different. More open. More free. The melody flowed with honesty that reached straight into the room. There was nothing left to hide now. People felt it immediately. The connection deepened. The music felt closer, warmer, more alive. A man near the back shook his head slowly, unable to believe what he was witnessing. She played with full heart now, letting everything move through her. The doubts, the patience, the strength built over time. She remembered all the times she played alone, wondering if anyone would ever truly hear her. Now, they were listening. The piano sang louder, brighter, carrying truth without fear. The crowd remained silent, completely still, afraid to break the flow. Her fingers moved with purpose, shaping the final stretch of the piece. The notes climbed, shining with hope. A woman pressed her hands together as if in prayer. The security worker stood frozen, eyes fixed on the piano. Forgetting his role entirely, she reached the final movement. This was the heart of it all. She played with strength that came from survival, not training alone. Every note said the same thing: I am here. The sound filled the hall like light pouring through open doors. She felt tears rise. But she did not stop. She let them come, trusting her hands to carry on. The final notes approached. She slowed, guiding the melody gently toward its end. The last note rang out, clear and strong. She held it, letting it live. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands from the keys. Silence followed, not empty silence, full silence. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then the room reacted. Applause broke out, sudden and overwhelming. Not polite clapping, but real sound. People stood without realizing they were doing it. Some clapped above their heads. Some cried openly. She sat still, breathing slowly, taking it in. This was not what she came for, but it mattered. She looked down at the mask beside her. She knew she would never wear it the same way again. The power she carried was no longer hidden, and nothing would ever feel the same. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the hall like a wave, loud at first, then steady, then soft again. Some people kept clapping even after others stopped, as if they were afraid that silence might take something away from the moment. She stayed seated at the piano, hands resting lightly on her lap. Her breathing was slow now, but her heart still beat strong. She looked out at the crowd for the first time without hiding. Faces stared back at her, not with judgment, but with wonder and respect. This felt strange. She had lived most of her life unseen. A few people stepped forward carefully, as if approaching something delicate. One woman spoke quietly, thanking her for the music. Her voice shook. She said it reminded her of things she had forgotten. Another person nodded and added that it felt honest, like the truth told without words. She listened and smiled gently, unsure what to say. Words had never been her strongest way of speaking. Music had always done that work for her. The security worker finally cleared his throat. He asked if she was a professional. His tone was respectful now, almost unsure. She shook her head slowly. She was not sure what that word even meant anymore. Someone asked where she learned to play like that. Someone else asked if she would play again tomorrow. A few people talked about sharing the video online. Their voices blended together. She raised her hand slightly. A quiet signal. The noise settled. She spoke softly, her voice calm and clear. She said she learned by listening, by watching, by practicing whenever and wherever she could. She said music was not something she owned. It was something she carried. People listened the same way they had listened to her playing. She stood up from the bench slowly. The old piano bench creaked again, just like before. But now the sound felt familiar, almost comforting. She picked up the mask and held it in her hands. For a moment, she looked at it, remembering why she needed it once. Then she folded it carefully and placed it inside her bag. That chapter was closed. The crowd slowly began to move again. Some returned to their pots. Others stayed behind, hoping for another moment. Life started to flow back into the hall. But it did not feel the same as before. Something had shifted. A man who had doubted her earlier stood nearby, silent. When she passed him, he nodded once, unable to meet her eyes. She nodded back, not holding anything against him. She walked toward the exit with calm steps. No rush. No need to escape outside. The air felt cooler, quieter. She stopped near the doors and took a deep breath. Her hands still felt warm from the keys. Her shoulders felt lighter. She thought about what came next. There would be questions, offers, opinions, noise. But she knew something important. She did not need to chase any of it. The power she revealed was not meant to impress strangers. It was meant to free herself. As she walked down the street, she passed people who had no idea what had just happened inside. The world continued, unaware, as it always did. That felt right. Later that night, she returned to her small room. The familiar quiet welcomed her. She placed her bag down and sat by the window for a moment, watching the lights outside. She did not feel tired. She felt complete. She thought back to the first time she touched a piano, to the long years of waiting, to the silence she chose when the world was not ready to listen. Now, she had spoken, and the world had listened. She knew there would be other chances to play, other rooms, other ears, but none would feel like that first moment of truth. She smiled to herself, not because of praise, but because she no longer needed permission to exist as she was. The next morning, messages began to appear, short clips, kind words, invitations. She read them slowly, then put the phone down. She sat at her small keyboard and played. Not for anyone else, just for herself. The notes flowed easily, without pressure, without fear. The story of the masked musician would spread in different ways. Some would exaggerate it. Some would misunderstand it. That did not matter. What mattered was simple. A woman sat at a piano. She played with truth. And in doing so, she changed how she saw herself forever. That was the real power. And it would stay with her long after the music faded.